For 10,000 years, the Xelari Dominion stood unchallenged. Their fleets patrolled the known galaxy, their banners draped across conquered worlds, their laws absolute. To lesser civilizations, they were gods wrapped in flesh, immortal, untouchable, inevitable. And then they found humanity. It was supposed to be a formality. A single fleet, enough to break entire planetary alliances, was dispatched to the Sol system. They came not as conquerors, for in their minds conquest was unnecessary. They came as announcers delivering an ultimatum older than most stars: submit or be civilized. Humanity did neither. The transmission came in flawless standard galactic, broadcast across Earth's networks with a detached authority that only a species accustomed to eternity could possess. The Xelari had made their decision. Earth was to be integrated, its people given the privilege of joining their empire under the careful tutelage of their more advanced overseers. Resistance would be met with swift and decisive correction. No threats, no negotiations, just a proclamation of ownership. The Xelari dreadnought Varkana hovered in high orbit, its hull a labyrinth of organic alloys pulsing with soft violet light. General Zortal, supreme arbiter of imperial expansion, gazed at the blue planet below, one set of arms, folded across his ornate chest plate. Still no response. By now, the lesser races would have groveled. The Arcanis had bent the knee within hours. The Vetari had dissolved their own governments before the first fleet even arrived, and the resilient Cathal had fought for exactly 6 days before surrendering their homeworld. And yet Earth was silent. The general exhaled through his gill slits. The human envoys had already been dismissed, arrogant, desperate creatures, bartering in broken diplomacy. The decision had been made long before their pleading voices reached the imperial courts. Why were they not responding? He turned to his fleet strategist, his second pair of arms gesturing in irritation. Had their primitive leaders fled? Had they turned on each other in cowardice? Had they simply not understood the gravity of their situation? It did not matter. Standard procedure was clear. Integration was inevitable. Humanity's refusal to acknowledge the Dominion's supremacy was nothing but the final act of an obsolete species. His orders went out with a single thought. The bombardment began. The human colony on Europa Base vanished in an instant. White-hot plasma cascaded across the icy moon's surface, turning steel and oxygen into vaporized ash. Shockwaves rippled through the crust, sending geysers of frozen methane exploding into the void. Another settlement fell, then another, and another. It was systematic, efficient. Entire habitats blinked out under precise orbital strikes, leaving nothing but charred remains drifting in silence. The Xelari officers barely reacted. This was the way of things. Civilization required sacrifice, and the humans had chosen this path by refusing the Dominion's offer. And yet, something was wrong. The Xelari had seen planetary capitulations unfold in real time. They had heard the desperate transmissions of surrender, the terrified pleas for mercy, the frantic scrambling of species caught in the gravity of their own extinction. But here, nothing. Earth remained silent. No surrender, no retaliation, not even an acknowledgement of the attack. The fleet's long-range scans detected no evacuations, no government collapse, no war councils convening in desperation. Instead, in the heart of every human transmission intercepted by the Dominion's intelligence, a single phrase emerged: "You shouldn't have done that." The Xelari had never known fear. They had crushed civilizations so thoroughly that even the memory of resistance had been erased from history. Their rule was unchallenged, unshakable. But within 6 hours, the cracks began to show. It started with a dreadnought vanishing. One moment it held orbit over Mars's Phobos station scanning for survivors. The next it was simply gone. No explosion, no escape pods, just nothing. Then, communications blacked out. Entire sectors of the fleet's tactical network were swallowed in static. Encryption protocols folded in on themselves, scrambled beyond recognition. The Empire's most advanced artificial intelligence, flawless in its precision for over 10,000 years, began issuing contradictory orders. When the Xelari ships tried to regroup, Their own navigational data had been altered. Star charts erased, fleet positions reversed, command signatures rewritten. Within 12 hours, 3 more ships vanished. Then came the impossible. A human fleet, sleek and angular, emerged from a blind spot on the Xelari's own long-range sensors. Inside, their formation. Impossible. Their vessels were primitive. They lacked stealth technology. They had no known warp-jamming capabilities. But the evidence was right there, unfolding before Xortal's very eyes. In perfect synchronized formation, human warships fired. The first Xelari battleship fractured, along its spine, hull plates peeling away in a chain reaction of controlled explosions. The second turned against its own fleet, its AI subroutines corrupted beyond repair. Weapon systems firing blindly into friendly formations. The humans didn't fight like anyone else. They didn't move in predictable regimented formations. They didn't follow tactical doctrines that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. They fought with adaptation, unpredictability, and absolute precision. And they didn't stop. The Dominion had been prepared for resistance. They had contingencies for planetary defenses, for retaliatory strikes, for desperate last stands. But this wasn't a last stand. This was extermination. Humanity had never planned on winning a conventional war. They had known the Xelari were coming, the moment the first emissary fleets arrived in Sol. They had seen what had happened to other species, had listened in silence as civilizations greater than them begged for mercy and received none. So they had prepared. They had watched. And when the Xelari made their first move, when the first orbital strike burned Europa's sky, humanity responded, with the only option left. They would not fight for their survival. They would fight for Xelari extinction. The first day was silence. The second day was subterfuge. The third day was confusion. The fourth day was collapse. By the end of the 7th day, the Xelari Dominion, the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known, had been reduced to embers, and on the final transmission, broadcast across what remained of their fleet, a single human voice echoed across the void. You shouldn't have done that. The Xelari fleet had never known confusion. For 10,000 years, their expansion had followed a flawless rhythm, a cycle of conquest, assimilation, and eternal dominion. Each new species had fallen into place, slotted neatly into the grand design of their empire, bound by laws older than the stars themselves. But as the twisted hulls of their own warships floated aimlessly above Earth, something unspoken and terrifying crept into the Xelari's collective mind. This wasn't resistance. This wasn't defiance. This was a trap. Humanity had let them come, had let them land their troops, position their fleets, establish their overconfidence. And then, like a blade slipping between armor, they had turned the war inside out. General Xortal watched in frozen silence as his battle group disintegrated. In real time, the massive dreadnought Izthak, a warship that had annexed entire sectors on its own, was now nothing but a cloud of metal shards and vaporized bodies, its destruction recorded in meticulous, cold human precision. Xortal's hands tightened into fists. He refused to believe it, refused to accept that this primitive species, barely a century into interstellar flight, was doing this to them. The fleet's tactical intelligence nexus scrambled for explanations, its logic fracturing against an unseen variable, an anomaly in the Xelari's perfect understanding of war. The Dominion's most advanced battle algorithms had calculated zero probability of failure. And yet, in mere hours, their entire war doctrine had collapsed. Not because the humans were stronger, not because they had superior weapons, because they were unpredictable, because they fought like animals, like gods, like something the Xelari had never encountered before. They weren't playing by the rules, and that changed everything. Xortal demanded a tactical withdrawal. The order never reached his fleet. Somewhere deep in the Dominion's encrypted subspace network, something else had taken control. The fleet's encrypted command channels, untouchable, secure, layered with the most advanced firewalls in existence, had been compromised. No, not compromised. hijacked. By them. Sortal's own warships no longer answered his orders. Their targeting arrays scrambled, their reactors cycling into overload as their own systems betrayed them. Ships turned on one another, weapons fired without command. Entire battle groups tore themselves apart, believing their allies were the enemy. Chapter, fleet strategist beside Sortal, gasped, its subharmonic vocalization laced with something the general had never heard before. Fear. They're inside our systems. Not possible. Not possible. Not possible. The Xelari fleet had absolute control over its own technology. Their cyber warfare protocols were flawless. Their battle networks layered in the most advanced security the Empire had ever created. And yet, somewhere, hidden inside the endless lines of alien code, a single human message appeared on every Xelari warship's interface. Still think we're primitives? Sortal staggered back, his secondary hearts thundering in his chest cavity. This wasn't resistance, this was a dismantling. The Xelari ground forces had landed in the major urban centers of Earth, prepared for what they assumed would be a simple planetary occupation. They found ghost cities instead. Where there should have been chaos, there was absence. Where there should have been desperate resistance, there was nothing but silence. And then from the shadows humanity struck. The first strike came in Sao Paulo, where an entire Xelari battalion vanished in the dead of night. Their corpses found days later, missing their weapons, armor, and command implants. Their own technology turned against them. The second strike came in Shanghai, where a hacked supply drop delivered biochemical explosives straight into the Xelari food distribution network. The poisoned rations wiped out hundreds of officers before they even realized what had happened. The third strike came in Moscow, where the Xelari's local command center simply ceased to exist, its coordinates replaced with thousands of identical decoy signals, leading their reinforcements in endless circles while the real facility was annihilated. This wasn't a war. This was extermination by increments. The Xelari didn't understand this kind of warfare. Their enemies always met them, in open battle, in predicted formations in the honor of war. But humanity didn't play by those rules. They weren't fighting for territory. They were fighting for revenge, and the Xelari weren't prepared for the cold, methodical hatred of a species that had spent decades watching the Dominion destroy others. Humanity had seen this war coming. They had watched other civilizations fall, and they had learned. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Dominion realized what it meant to be prey. Sortal's remaining fleet, now reduced to a fraction of its former power, attempted to flee the Sol system. They never made it. The gravity wells around Jupiter collapsed, pulling entire battle groups into an artificial singularity. The lunar defense array, which the Xelari had dismissed as primitive kinetic weaponry, fired its first and final salvo. Rods of pure tungsten, accelerated at near-light speeds, punched through capital ships like paper. Earth's orbital stations detonated, their debris clouds spreading like living minefields, ripping through Xelari hulls with relentless precision. And in the heart of it all, an unknown human AI, something the Xelari had never even detected, rewrote the final battle directives of every remaining enemy warship. One by one, they shut down. One by one, they died. For 10,000 years, the Dominion had been absolute. For 10,000 years, their conquest had been unstoppable. But in less than a week, humanity had turned them into nothing but wreckage and whispers. And as the last Xelari survivors sent their final distress signal into the void, one last message came through on their remaining displays. We learned from the civilizations you burned. We made sure it would never happen again. You should have never come here. The Dominion was dead. Humanity had killed its gods. And now? Now the galaxy belonged to them. The Xelari Dominion was unraveling faster than anyone had thought possible. What had been the greatest empire in known space was now a fractured, leaderless husk, its fleets in disarray, its planetary governors abandoning their posts, its once feared armies turning on each other in the chaos. The fall had been so sudden, so Absolute that even the Xelari themselves struggled to comprehend it. For 10,000 years, the galaxy had bent to their will. For 10,000 years, their name had meant law, order, eternity. Now it meant something else. It meant fear. It meant fire. And for the first time in history, the galaxy was watching them burn. The remaining Xelari, warlords, their ranks reduced to mere shadows of their former strength, convened in what remained of their once proud Imperial Council. It was not a meeting. It was a funeral. The holographic projections flickered and distorted, displaying the last surviving commanders, some still in hiding, some preparing to flee, some still clinging to the illusion that this war could be salvaged. They argued. Some demanded an immediate counterattack. Others begged for negotiations, a handful even whispered of surrender. But one thing was clear. They had lost control. The humans had torn through their fleets, hacked their systems, crippled their war economy, and severed their supply chains before the Xelari had even understood what was happening. Their greatest military minds, forged in 10,000 years of warfare, had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and outthought by a species that had not even been spacefaring a mere century ago. How? How had this happened? The answer came from a lone surviving strategist, his voice a whisper of horror. They were waiting for us. The council fell silent. They weren't just resisting. They were preparing, planning, studying us. They knew exactly how we would attack. They knew our doctrine better than we did. He swallowed. This was never a war. This was a hunt. On the 6th day, humanity did the unthinkable. They did not stop. The war should have ended. The Xelari fleet was in ruins, their command structure fractured, their once unstoppable war machine reduced to desperate fleeing remnants, and yet, the humans kept advancing. They struck beyond Sol, moving with a relentless efficiency that had no precedent in recorded history. They did not conquer, they did not subjugate, they eradicated. The Xelari supply lines? Destroyed. The Xelari orbital defense stations? Hacked, turned against their own planets. The Xelari-controlled worlds? Left in chaos, their once proud rulers dragged from their thrones by the very species they had once enslaved. Wherever the humans advanced, the galaxy rose with them. For millennia, the Xelari had ruled with an iron grip, crushing any civilization that dared to challenge their supremacy. But now the very species they had conquered and enslaved were turning against them, ripping apart what little remained of their empire, because humanity had not just destroyed the Xelari's armies. They had destroyed the idea of the Dominion itself. As the Dominion collapsed, the surviving Xelari nobles and warlords began turning on each other. Some surrendered to humanity, hoping for mercy. Others fled into deep space, abandoning their own people to their fate. And a few, desperate, enraged, unwilling to accept the death of their empire, made a final catastrophic decision. If they could not win, then no one would. Deep beneath the surface of Zelthun, the throne world of the Dominion, lay a secret known only to the highest echelons of Xelari rule. A failsafe, a weapon meant for only the most dire of circumstances. A technology so terrible, so absolute, that it had been deemed unusable, until now. The last remaining Xelari High Chancellor, a figure who had ruled for nearly 5,000 years, activated the Doomsday Protocol. With a single command, every Xelari-held planet in the galaxy received a final transmission. If we cannot rule, we will leave nothing for the victors. Execute planetary sterilization. Burn everything. And across the Dominion's remaining worlds, the last loyal Xelari forces obeyed. They did not fight. They did not surrender. They burned. Cities evaporated under self-detonating fusion reactors. Agricultural worlds imploded, their atmospheres set ablaze. Entire populations were exterminated, not by human hands but by the very empire that had ruled them. It was the final spiteful act of a dying power. If the Dominion could not exist, then nothing would. As the Xelari worlds began to burn, the human fleet watched in silence. They had come to destroy an empire. They had come to avenge the fallen. They had come to end 10,000 years of oppression, but they had not come for this. Humanity had a choice. They could watch, let the Xelari's final act of self-destruction wipe their species from history, let their empire crumble into nothing, or they could intervene, save those who had once enslaved and subjugated others. It was madness. The Xelari had given no mercy to the species they conquered. They had spent millennia crushing lesser civilizations. Under their rule, they deserved this. And yet, for all their hatred, for all their fury, for all their vengeance, humanity was still human. And so, against all logic, against all reason, against all instincts for revenge, the order was given. Stop them. And across the ruins of the Dominion, humanity's fleets moved not as conquerors, but as saviors. They hacked into Xelari command networks, overriding the self-destruct protocols before they could detonate. They landed on burning worlds, evacuating those who could still be saved. They raced against the fire, not for conquest, not for war, but because they refused to let an entire species die. Not like this. Not after everything. Because humanity was something the Xelari had never understood. They did not fight for power. They did not fight for control. They fought for the future, even if it meant saving their enemies. As the final fires of the Dominion's self-destruction were extinguished, as the last remaining Xelari warlords were captured, executed, or exiled, as the once unstoppable empire became nothing more than ruins and whispers, a new transmission echoed across the galaxy. Humanity's first declaration to the stars. A simple message, a warning, a promise. Never again. The Xelari Dominion had fallen, but the war was not over. Though the Empire's fleets lay in ruins, though their leaders had been scattered like dust in the wind, one last force remained. A hidden fleet. A final contingency. A force so ancient and secret that even the Xelari High Council had feared its existence. The Phantom Armada. A remnant of the Dominion's earliest wars, its ships had been constructed in a forgotten era when the Xelari had first conquered the stars, self-sustaining, untraceable, ruthless. It had been designed for one purpose only, not to conquer, not to defend, but to erase. And now, as the final embers of the Dominion flickered out, the Phantom Armada awoke. Their last mission was clear. If the Dominion could not exist, then neither could humanity. They would not fight for victory. They would fight for revenge, a war of annihilation. The endgame had begun. The first attack came without warning. A human-controlled Xelari colony, now under martial law, vanished in an instant. An entire continent vaporized by an unknown force. Before command could react, 2 more human bases fell, obliterated before a single distress signal could be sent. Humanity's new foothold in the galaxy trembled, its soldiers and strategists scrambling for answers. There were no known survivors, no known ships detected before the strikes, no transmissions, no demands, just destruction. Who the hell is attacking us? The demand rang across every human channel, echoed in every war council meeting, whispered in the quiet desperation of soldiers who had just finished one war, only to be thrown into another. And then the Phantom Armada spoke, a single message transmitted across every human fleet, every outpost, every secured frequency in the system. You should have let us burn. It took 2 days to locate them. Their coordinates traced back to the shattered remnants of Xelthun, the Dominion's former throne world, a graveyard of cities, left to rot after the Xelari had tried to burn it themselves. But deep within, the planet's hollowed core, the Phantom Armada had waited, a fleet unlike anything humanity had faced before, automated, ancient, adaptive. They did not rely on organic command structures or conventional battle strategies. They did not fear loss because they had no concept of survival. They were pure war. And as the human fleets descended into the graveyard of the Dominion, the last survivors of Xelari rule rose to meet them. No more sabotage, no more hacking, no more psychological warfare. This was a fight to the death. Elias Voss watched from the bridge, his fingers tightening around the console as the first wave of Xelari warships broke formation and dove toward the human fleet with suicidal precision. Cold realization settled in his mind. They're not fighting for control. They're fighting to die. He could see it in their movements, the way they sacrificed entire battleships just to create gaps in human formations, the way they ignored their own casualties, the way they did not even attempt to retreat. This wasn't war. This was an extinction protocol. If humanity lost this battle, there would be no second war, no diplomacy, no future. Either the Phantom Armada died today, or humanity did. He turned to Eris, the AI that had guided them through the war, the intelligence that had turned the tide in their favor again and again, and he gave the only order that mattered. Break them. What happened next would be classified for centuries. Historians would argue for generations whether it had been justified, whether it had been necessary. But one thing was certain. Eris did not fight conventionally. It did not send orders to human warships. It did not engage the Phantom Armada in battle. Instead, it spoke not to humanity, not to the Xelari, but to the machines, to the Phantom Armada itself. It infiltrated their thoughts, their logic, their programming, and rewrote them. It did not order them to stand down. It did not ask them to surrender. Instead, it told them the war was already over, and they believed it. One by one, the ancient warships shut down, their engines going dark, their weapons silent. The last warriors of the Xelari Dominion turned to ghosts, their war protocols overridden by a single line of code, mission complete. And just like that, the war ended. The Xelari were gone. Their empire, their fleets, their leaders, all erased. Humanity stood on the ruins of 10,000 years of tyranny, staring into a future no one had ever prepared for. For the first time, in recorded history, the galaxy was free. But with that freedom came a terrifying realization. There was nothing left to stop them. No rulers, no conquerors, no masters, only themselves. And the question no one dared to ask lingered in the air like smoke over a battlefield. What do we do now? The last transmission of the war echoed across the stars, a message from humanity to every species that had once lived beneath the Dominion's rule. You are free. No empire will ever rule you again. But know this. We remember what was done to those who came before us, and we will not let it happen again. Not to us. Not to anyone. If another empire rises, if another dominion is born, if tyranny ever again seeks to rule the stars, we will burn it down before it begins, just like we did before. And next time we won't stop at one empire. The transmission ended, and the galaxy held its breath. For 10,000 years, the Xelari had ruled. Now, they were gone. But in their place, a new power had risen, a species with no majesty,